in the other situation that we're often talking about in Gaza, when there are strikes, there have been strikes that have hit hospitals, other facilities, universities. In those cases, and in some cases, U.S. weapons are actually involved in those strikes, but you've been pretty unable in a lot of those cases to say definitively what happened. Why the disparity there about your sort of information gathering?
So the disparity is in the context of the events, and I'll give you just a couple of examples when it comes to Gaza. What makes these types of assessments so hard? Oftentimes, it is clear that a strike on any one target was an Israeli strike. If it's an airstrike, for example, it's clear that it was an Israeli strike. It's not from anyone else. Sometimes there are other attacks where there's an exchange of fire between Hamas and the IDF, and it's clear, or it's unclear, I should say, when one specific site was damaged, whether that damage was from IDF munitions, Hamas munitions, or both, which sometimes happens in a crossfire. That's one way in which it's difficult. The other way in which it's difficult is understanding what the actual target was. And so that's one of the things that's different when you look at Russia's strikes on Ukraine. The Ukrainian military doesn't hide behind civilians. It's not headquartering itself in hospitals, under hospitals, in other civilian sites, in apartment buildings. And that's exactly what we see Hamas do. And so when you get to making assessments about strikes in Gaza, it's not just always who conducted the strike, but whether the strike ultimately was after a legitimate military target or not. And it's a much different assessment in Gaza, where you have Hamas using civilians as human shields, which is not at all the case in Ukraine.
Right, but you did sort of say that it seems that this isn't an accidental strike aimed at something else. That's there's quite a lot of information that you're able to sort of pass on there. There have been cases where, I'm obviously not defending the Russian strikes, but there are cases where Ukrainian anti-aircraft fire has taken down a missile and it hits something, right? There is complexity to that, but you're able to, a few hours later, give a pretty detailed account of what happened. I'm not saying I'll give you a break on that. That's your job. But on the Israeli case, often, we're left with after months, you haven't come up with a real conclusion about what happened in a certain specific incident. That and these are U.S. weapons that are being used. You have the ability to sort of demand answers from the country involved. So I think people will watch this and think, there's a disparity here, and I'm wondering, is there not a difference in the way that you're approaching these and giving the benefit of the doubt to one side?
There is no difference in how we are approaching these. There's a difference in the context. There's a difference in the conflict, and that's what leads to our inability sometimes to give such definitive answers. I will also say that there is a difference in assessing responsibility for a strike, right, which is what I was getting into a moment ago, and assessing whether the strike was a legitimate military target. Those are two entirely separate things. Sometimes you can make an assessment about who carried out the strike, but you can't know unless you were on the ground whether it was a legitimate military target. And that's especially the case where we often see conflicting claims in Gaza, which is not the case in Ukraine. I haven't heard any conflicting claims about what happened in Ukraine and what Russia might have been trying to hit if it was not this hospital, if it was not the other civilian infrastructure that they have hit. And I've seen no claims from Russia that there were legitimate military targets embedded in this civilian infrastructure. That is often the case in Gaza, where you get conflicting claims, where you have reports from the ground that there were no Hamas fighters there, and you have the IDF claiming that it took out a number of Hamas fighters. When you have those conflicting claims, that often makes it hard to offer definitive conclusions for what I would hope are fairly obvious reasons.
Can I say Gaza?
I'll go to Saeed first. I'll come to you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you first if you read or heard about the Haaretz report on Israel employing the Hannibal directive on October 7th?
So I did see that report that moved over the weekend, and that's the limit of my knowledge of seeing that report from Haaretz.
Does that make you change your position or your perspective on what really happened that day, that the Israelis may be responsible for killing a majority of the people that died on that day?
Boy, it certainly does not, Saeed.
Doesn't.
I don't think
Okay.
there's
I
any
ju- I just
question.
wanna-
I don't think there's any question that,
All right.
that it was Hamas. Just let me finish. I don't think it's any question it's Hamas that is responsible for the overwhelming number of deaths
Right.
on
Okay.
October 7th.
All right. Now, you in your answer to Simon, you gave two answers. You were saying that, almost with certainty that people were killed in the crossfire. Do you have any figure on how many people got killed in the crossfire?
No.
Or how many people that died as a result of direct Israeli attacks?
No, I don't. But that's exactly my point, Saeed. I'll give you the best example of this is the recent hostage rescue when a number of people in the area who were not members of Hamas were killed in crossfire. And that happened when Israeli vehicles with a hostage on board were leaving the area, took fire from Hamas, and then there was exchange of fire. And that's something that happens from time to time.
300 people died that day. But at any rate, so let me ask you, what is the status of the negotiation now? Is there a ceasefire in Gaza's future?
We certainly hope there's a ceasefire in Gaza's future, and we are trying incredibly hard to achieve a ceasefire. The negotiations are ongoing. The CI director is in Cairo today working on those negotiations. As we said last week when we received a response from Hamas, we found reasons to be hopeful in that response. But that said, we don't yet have a deal, and we're not taking anything in granted unless and until we get a deal. And so we continue to work to try to achieve a ceasefire that would secure the release of hostages, would allow us to surge humanitarian assistance in and alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people.
So you believe that the Israeli Prime Minister is okay with this new proposal?
He has said he is, yes.
Okay.
Let me just be correct. I want to make sure I'm not misunderstood. I don't mean that in that he has endorsed the proposal has come back from Hamas. He has endorsed the proposal that the Israeli government put forward, and we're working to bridge the differences between Hamas's response and what the Israeli government put forward sometime before, several weeks ago.
You think this is a bridge too far?
I'm not going to negotiate on this in public.
All right. Let me ask you a couple of things. I mean, we see Israel, Rafah is completely destroyed and people are dying. Israel is just grabbing land in the West Bank. It's really doing a lot of things. Would you be agreeable to any other state doing what Israel has done, let's say, in the past 48 hours or the past 72 hours or the past week and so on against Palestinians, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank? I mean, wouldn't you be outraged? I mean, we hear reports by Israeli soldiers themselves. They're saying they were killing children because they were bored.
So
crying out loud.
Let me take those one at a time. When it comes to abuses by the IDF, we make very clear that we expect the IDF to have full accountability for any soldier that behaves inappropriately, that violates either IDF rules of engagement or the laws of war. And we have seen the IDF announce that they will take steps to impose such accountability, and we will be watching that very closely. When it comes to settlements, we have also made clear that we oppose the advancement of settlements in the West Bank. We think that they're both inconsistent with international law and that they are ultimately counterproductive to the realization of peace, which is in Israel's interest. And that includes urging Israeli officials to not take actions to fund outposts that have long been illegal under Israeli law. So we will continue to make that clear.
So any particular response to what happened last week in terms of the size of land confiscated by Israel for settlement purposes, which is apparently the largest since the 1967 war, in a sense, definitely since the Oslo Accord in 1993. Have any particular comment on that?
Yeah, as I just said, we oppose the advancement of settlements. We oppose them taking actions to fund outposts. We think all of those are illegal under international law and ultimately hurt the chances of peace.
Can I just follow up on that point that Saeed was making about ceasefire? Because there was a list of principles the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, his office issued yesterday on the ceasefire, one of which appeared to be a desire, or he said insisting on resuming fighting until all the objectives of the war have been achieved. I mean, we know that one of his objectives is the complete destruction of Hamas, not just its military existence, but also its administrative governance capabilities and so on, which goes way beyond what the president announced in his May framework that was described as the Israeli proposal. So have you got any reaction to what he said yesterday.
So I don't know that this will be a satisfying answer, but I think it's most productive to hold these negotiations in private, not in public.
But it wasn't. But the president made a very public announcement about.
Just hold on. Just let me finish, Tom. I'm happy to answer the question. You can ask me a follow-up if you want. We think it is productive to have these conversations in private, not in public. Sometimes seeing the Israeli government make public statements. We've seen Hamas make public statements. We're going to hold the negotiations in private, and what has not changed is Israel is in its conversations with us saying that they are committed to the proposal that the president publicly outlined.
The reason I was pushing back on that is it was a very public announcement by the president about, in some detail, about what should be in this proposal, and we have a very public announcement by the Israeli Prime Minister about what he believes. So this isn't, I'm not asking you to negotiate in public, I'm just asking for whether you believe this is a shift in the Israeli position, or is this something that Mr. Netanyahu is simply saying for
We do
public
not
reasons?
believe that their substantive position has changed. They have consistently supported the proposal that they put forward several weeks ago that the president outlined
So
publicly.
do you think he's saying this for domestic consumption and he doesn't actually mean it?
I'm just not going to characterize it at all.